March 24th, 1945. Over Berlin, the sky is a furnace of smoke, vapor trails, and fire. A B-17 bucks hard in formation, one engine pouring black smoke into the freezing air. Inside, the crew can feel every hit through the metal. Gunners scan the clouds, searching for shapes that move too fast to track. Then they see them. German Me-262 jets, sleek, sudden, and terrifyingly fast, cut through the formation before most of the bomber crews can even react. For the men trapped in those bombers, there is almost no time to think, only time to hope. Hope that somewhere above them, behind them, or dropping through the cloud cover, the escort fighters are still there. And then, at last, they appear. Red tails. Within minutes, one of the most dangerous air battles of the war will turn on the skill, discipline, and nerve of the men flying those Mustangs. But what happened over Berlin did not begin over Berlin. It began years earlier, in a country that doubted those men should have been in the cockpit at all. Before bomber crews trusted the red tails with their lives, many Americans still questioned whether black pilots belonged in combat. Before the legend, there was segregation. Before the victories, there were training fields in Alabama, closed doors, and impossible standards. And before those red-tailed fighters became a symbol of protection in the skies over Europe, a handful of men helped build the discipline, confidence, and reputation that made that moment over Berlin possible. This is the story of 5 Tuskegee Airmen and how their courage, in very different ways, changed what survival looked like in the air war over Europe. Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. Every great combat unit begins with a standard. For the Tuskegee Airmen, that standard was Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. Davis understood something from the beginning that few men in uniform ever had to carry with such weight. His pilots were not going to be judged only as individuals. They would be judged as proof, or as an excuse. If they failed, many people in the military would not call it a bad mission. They would call it confirmation of a prejudice they already believed. So Davis built a unit that left as little room for doubt as possible. He emphasized discipline over swagger, precision over showmanship. Escort duty was not a stage for reckless heroics. It was a responsibility. If bombers were depending on you, then you stayed with the bombers. That mattered because fighter pilots often wanted to chase kills. Davis wanted something harder. He wanted his men to protect the formation, resist the temptation to break away, and bring those crews home. The aircraft changed as the war went on. The 99th Fighter Squadron first saw combat in P-40 Warhawks in North Africa. Later, the 332nd Fighter Group transitioned through other aircraft before becoming closely identified with the P-51 Mustang, the fighter that would make the Red Tails famous. But Davis's most important contribution was not a machine. It was a mindset. Stay disciplined. Stay with the bombers. Finish the mission. And over time, bomber crews noticed the difference. When some escort groups broke formation to chase enemy aircraft, the Red Tails built a reputation for staying where they were needed most. That reputation was not born in a single battle. It was drilled, demanded, and earned under Davis long before Berlin ever came into view, and that discipline needed more than one leader in the sky. It needed a system on the ground, a pipeline that could produce pilots capable of surviving their first mission and steady enough to protect everyone behind them. Daniel Chappie James Jr., that is where Daniel Chappie James Jr. enters the story. James did not fight over Berlin, and that is exactly why his role is so easy to overlook. But wars are not shaped only by the men in the headline battle. They are also shaped by the people who prepare others to endure it. At Tuskegee, James first completed civilian pilot training and then remained as a civilian instructor pilot before entering the Army Air Corps Aviation Cadet Program himself. In a training system surrounded by doubt and pressure, that work mattered. Young black pilots were not just learning takeoffs, landings, and formation flying. They were learning under the burden of knowing that their mistakes would be judged as more than personal mistakes. For them, failure carried the weight of stereotype. Success carried the burden of representation. James helped shape men before combat ever tested them. He helped turn raw trainees into pilots who could keep formation under pressure, follow orders in chaos, and control fear long enough to make good decisions. And by 1945, that mattered enormously, because while bomber crews over Europe were looking for red tails in the sky, someone had to make sure there were still qualified pilots ready to wear that paint into combat. Roscoe Brown Jr., the formation is still under attack. Me-262 jets slash past the bombers with a speed piston engine pilots had learned to fear. This is where Roscoe Brown Jr. becomes central to the story. By 1945, Brown was already an experienced combat pilot. He had flown dozens of missions escorting B-17 and B-24 across Germany, Austria, and the Balkans. He understood that escort duty was not glamorous. It was long, cold, exhausting work that demanded concentration long after adrenaline wore off. One careless decision collision could leave a bomber formation exposed. Then came March 24, 1945, the 15th Air Force's longest mission of the war. While escorting B-17S over Berlin, Brown engaged and shot down a German Me-262 jet fighter, becoming the first 15th Air Force fighter pilot to destroy one in combat. Later in the mission, he also downed an FW-190. That moment matters because it captures the larger truth of the Red Tails. This was not luck. It was training under pressure, calm under speed, judgment in chaos. A pilot in a propeller-driven Mustang had just beaten one of Nazi Germany's most advanced aircraft in the middle of a mission built around protecting other men. For bomber crews watching that battle unfold, the meaning was immediate. The Red Tails were not simply present, they were answering. Mid-video hook. But Brown was not the only reason the Red Tails had become a name enemy pilots respected. Before Berlin, another pilot had already helped turn those escorts from reassurance for bomber crews into a warning for German fighters. Lee Archer represented the other side of the Red Tail reputation. If Davis gave the group its discipline and Brown showed what composure looked like under extreme pressure, Archer showed that the Red Tails could also punish anyone who underestimated them. Archer flew 169 combat missions in World War II, escort missions, strafing runs, dangerous operations over enemy territory. He built his reputation in the kind of air war where hesitation could cost lives in seconds. He is most often associated with his P-51C Mustang, Ina the Macon Bell, and with a style of combat that was fast, confident, and lethal when the moment demanded it. On October 12, 1944, during a mission in the region between Budapest and Bratislava, Archer shot down 3 German Me-109 fighters in a single day. That kind of performance does more than fill out a record. It changes how other pilots think. Bomber crews hear those stories and feel steadier when they see red-painted tails beside them. Enemy pilots hear those stories and understand that these escorts are not easy prey. That is how reputations are built in war, not by slogans but by repeated proof. So, by the time Berlin erupted in March 1945, the Red Tails were not arriving as strangers to danger. They were arriving with a reputation that had already been earned. Charles McGee. And then there was Charles McGee. If Archer embodied aggression when the moment required it, McGee embodied endurance. The air war over Europe was not won by one dramatic victory. It was sustained by men who climbed back into the cockpit again and again, even after long flights, freezing altitudes, mechanical strain, and the knowledge that every mission might be the one that ended everything. McGee flew 136 combat missions during World War II. Over the course of the war, he flew multiple aircraft, including the P-39 Airacobra, the P-47 Thunderbolt, and the P-51 Mustang. Different aircraft, different handling, different risks, same mission. Protect the bombers, stay sharp, bring people home. On August 24, 1944, while escorting bombers, McGee engaged attacking German fighters and destroyed an FW-190 after driving it into a dive. Moments like that mattered not just because they were victories, but because they reflected the kind of steady judgment bomber crews depended on. That is what made pilots like McGee so valuable. Not flash, not myth, reliability. And reliability in a war like this becomes a form of courage all by itself. By the time the Berlin mission arrived, the Red Tail reputation was not the result of one spectacular afternoon. It had been built through discipline, training, aggression when necessary, and the steady consistency of men who kept showing up. Beginning the smoke, the damaged bombers, the Me-262s cutting through the sky, the crews inside those aircraft waiting for help they could not control and might not live to see. And then the answer arrives in the form of red-painted tails. What made that moment meaningful was never just one pilot, one dogfight, or one lucky mission. It was the combined force of different kinds of courage. Benjamin O. Davis Jr. built the discipline that gave the group its identity. Daniel Chappie James Jr. helped sustain the training pipeline that ensured skilled pilots kept reaching the front. Roscoe Brown Jr. showed that even Germany's most advanced aircraft could be beaten by a pilot who stayed calm under immense pressure. Lee Archer helped make enemy pilots respect and fear the escorts they once might have dismissed. Charles McGee proved that consistency, endurance, and judgment could save lives just as surely as a dramatic victory. And there is one more thing worth saying clearly. The Tuskegee Airmen did not literally never lose a bomber under escort. That famous line became a myth. But the truth is not weaker, it is stronger. Historical research shows that bombers under the 332nd Fighter Group's escort were lost on several occasions, yet the group still lost significantly fewer bombers than the average for other fighter groups in the 15th Air Force. That means their legacy does not depend on exaggeration. It stands on something better: performance. These men were asked to prove they belonged in the sky. They ended up becoming the pilots other crews hoped to see in it. That is why Berlin mattered. That is why the Red Tails mattered. And that is how 5 Tuskegee Airmen, through leadership training, endurance, and combat skill, helped change the air war over Europe. End outro. If you enjoyed this story, watch our last video on how 4 American warplanes helped win the Battle of Okinawa. That episode looks at the machines. This one was about the men who had to trust them with their lives. If you're watching from somewhere around the world, leave your city and country below, and I'll see you in the next mission.